Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Imagine you've had what doctors sometimes call a mini stroke or maybe a transient ischemic attack. Your first instinct might be just to rest up, right?
Yeah,
Maybe spend a lot more time in bed.
that makes sense instinctively.
But what if spending that extra time in bed or even, sleeping longer than usual was actually linked somehow to more problems inside your brain and maybe even with your ability to think clearly?
Yeah, that really goes against the grain, doesn't it? We tend to think of sleep as purely restorative, especially during recovery.
Exactly. It feels quite counterintuitive. So our deep dive today is looking into this really fascinating, maybe slightly surprising new information.
We're exploring this connection between specific sleep patterns people reported after having a mild stroke or a transient ischemic attack, and what happened next with their brain health and cognitive function.
Right. We're drawing on a couple of sources here. There's a health news article that flagged this recent study, and we've also been, digging into the actual scientific paper itself, published in the journal Neurology.
It gives us the details.
So our mission today is to pull out the most important findings from this research, try to understand what they might sort of signal for people who've gone through one of these events.
And also figure out what big questions the study leaves us with, what needs looking into next.
Definitely. Because disturbed sleep is apparently quite common after any kind of stroke, isn't it? Even these milder ones.
Oh, absolutely. It's frequently reported. And that's part of why this research is so important, understanding these milder events, like a transient ischemic attack where maybe sleep hasn't been studied quite as much.
That makes sense. So that prevalence was a key motivation for these researchers.
It seems so. The main goal of their study was really to explore the relationship between how people said they slept shortly after a mild stroke or transient ischemic attack, and these visible signs of damage to the brain's tiny blood vessels, what's called small vessel disease, plus how they performed on tests measuring thinking and memory.
And they specifically noted, didn't they, that while we know about sleep issues after more severe strokes, there's less understanding when it comes to these, milder events.
Precisely. So, okay, how did they do it? Well, they put together a study group of 422 adults. All of these people had recently experienced either a mild stroke or a transient ischemic attack. And their symptoms were genuinely mild. They averaged just a score of 1 on a standard stroke severity scale where, 1 to 4 is considered mild.
And one interesting aspect is where they recruited these people from, right? It wasn't just one place.
No, that's a good point. The participants came from 2 different groups. One was based in Edinburgh in the United Kingdom, and the other was in Hong Kong. So that mix allowed them to look at populations with different ethnic backgrounds, which adds strength to the findings.
Okay, so they have these participants. What kind of assessments did they do?
Well, within about 1 to 3 months after their stroke or transient ischemic attack, everyone went through several key things. First, detailed brain scans using magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. And these scans were specifically looking for those signs of small vessel disease, the damage to the small blood vessels.
Okay, brain scans. What else?
They also did cognitive tests. They used a well-known assessment tool called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment to check thinking and memory skills.
Right, the MoCA test, I think it's sometimes called.
That's the one. And then, crucially for this particular study, everyone filled out a pretty detailed sleep questionnaire. It was based on a standard sleep index, adapted slightly, and it asked about their sleep patterns, things like how much total time they spent in bed each night and how long they felt they actually slept. Self-reported data.
Got it. So you have the sleep questionnaire info, the MRI brain scan results showing the small vessel disease, and the scores from the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. What did the researchers do with all that data?
They basically looked for connections, for associations between the sleep metrics and the brain or cognitive findings. And importantly, they did statistical adjustments. They controlled for a whole bunch of other factors that could potentially muddy the waters. Things like age, sex, education level.
Like maybe blood pressure or smoking history.
Exactly. Those vascular risk factors, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, smoking, they adjusted for those. Also for any history of depression, and which city the participant was from, Edinburgh or Hong Kong.
Okay, so trying to isolate the sleep connection as much as possible, that makes sense. So what did they actually find? Did the sleep data link up with the brain scans or the thinking tests?
Yes, they found some pretty notable things. The first significant finding was about the total time participants reported spending in bed. And remember, this isn't necessarily just time asleep. It includes time trying to sleep or just lying there.
Okay, total time in bed. What about it?
They found that a longer total time spent in bed was significantly associated with a greater overall burden of small vessel disease seen on those MRI scans.
Wow. So more time in bed linked to more visible signs of damage to the brain's small blood vessels.
That's what the association suggests, yes. And they dug a bit deeper into the types of small vessel disease. Specifically, this longer time in bed was linked to more severe periventricular white matter hyperintensities.
Okay, let's spell that out. Periventricular white matter hyperintensities.
Periventricular white matter hyperintensities.
And the sources explain those. Periventricular white matter hyperintensities. As areas in the brain's white matter that look damaged on scans, often seen as signs of problems with the small blood vessels.
Correct. Particularly in the white matter regions around the brain's fluid-filled spaces, the ventricles. So spending more time in bed was associated with more of that specific type of visible damage.
And it wasn't just about the brain structure, was it? There was a link to thinking skills, too.
Yes, that was the second key finding related to time in bed. Longer total time spent in bed was also associated with lower scores on that Montreal Cognitive Assessment.
Lower scores meaning worse performance on the thinking and memory tests?
Exactly. So more time in bed seemed to go hand in hand with both more signs of small vessel damage and poorer cognitive function in this group.
Huh. Okay, was that everything on sleep? Or were there other findings?
There was one more finding related to a slightly different measure. The total reported sleep duration, so the actual amount of time people estimated they were asleep.
Ah, okay. Not just time in bed, but estimated sleep time.
Right. And longer reported sleep duration was associated with the presence of cerebral microbleeds. Let's spell that. Cerebral microbleeds.
Cerebral microbleeds. And those are described as tiny spots of bleeding in the brain tissue itself, right? Microscopic bleeds.
That's the description. So it's interesting, longer time in bed linked to the overall small vessel disease burden and lower cognitive scores, while longer reported sleep time was linked specifically to these cerebral microbleeds.
That is a subtle difference. Different aspects of reported sleep behavior linked to different brain issues.
It seems so. Now, it's really, really important to stress what the researchers themselves emphasized about these findings, that this study shows an association, a correlation. It found these links, but it does not prove that the sleep patterns, like spending more time in bed, actually cause the brain changes or the thinking problems.
Right, the classic correlation doesn't equal causation. That's so critical here.
Absolutely vital. It's entirely possible that the underlying brain issues, the small vessel disease, or the lingering effects of the mild stroke or transient ischemic attack are actually the things disrupting people's sleep patterns, leading them to spend more time in bed or sleep longer.
So the sleep issues could be a symptom, not the cause.
Or it could be some other unmeasured factor influencing both sleep and brain health. We just can't tell cause and effect from this type of study design.
Okay. So, keeping that very important caveat in mind, it's just an association. What might these findings signal? What are the implications for people recovering from a mild stroke or transient ischemic attack?
Well, what's intriguing is that it suggests these disturbed sleep patterns, whether it's spending a lot of time in bed, perhaps struggling to sleep, or actually sleeping for very long durations might be more than just, an annoying symptom after the event.
It might be acting as a kind of marker, a signpost for something else going on.
Exactly. One of the study authors, Dr. Joanna M. Wardlaw, put it quite clearly. She said, and I'm quoting loosely here, that these results show disturbed sleep could be a marker of adverse brain health, even in people who've only had mild strokes or transient ischemic attacks.
A marker. Indicating maybe underlying problems or ongoing processes affecting the brain. And it really shifts the focus, doesn't it? It's not just about worrying if you're getting too little sleep.
That's a really key takeaway, I think. The study highlights that, we know lack of sleep isn't great, but maybe we haven't paid enough attention to the potential implications of sleeping longer than average or just spending excessive time in bed, whether that's intentional rest or due to difficulty sleeping.
So it broadens the perspective, looking at the whole pattern of rest and time in bed, not just sleep deprivation.
Yes, the pattern, the duration, the quality perhaps. Though this study relied on self-report, the sources also briefly mention some possible biological reasons why these links might exist, although, again, this is speculative and needs much more research.
Like what sort of mechanisms?
Well, they touch on ideas like disturbed sleep potentially messing with the brain's waste clearance system, sometimes called the glymphatic system, which helps clear out harmful proteins.
Ah, like the brain's overnight cleaning crew getting disrupted.
Something like that, yeah. Other possibilities mentioned include negative effects on the blood-brain barrier, maybe an increase in neuroinflammation, or even issues with the body's internal clock, the circadian rhythm.
Which could affect things like blood pressure regulation.
Right, and blood pressure is a big factor in small vessel disease, so any of those could theoretically contribute to the brain changes they saw.
Makes sense.
But, and it's a big but, we have to circle back to the other possibility, that the existing brain damage from the stroke, the transient ischemic attack, or the underlying small vessel disease is actually causing the sleep disturbances in the first place. It's that chicken and egg problem again.
Which really underlines why understanding the study's limitations is so crucial before anyone jumps to conclusions.
Absolutely. We have to be clear about what this study can't tell us. Firstly, as we mentioned, it's cross-sectional. It's like a snapshot in time. They looked at everyone just once, between 1 and 3 months after their event.
So no follow-up over time?
No longitudinal data. They didn't track people to see if sleep patterns changed before the event or how brain health and thinking skills evolved over the following months or years. Without that long-term view, determining cause and effect is basically impossible.
And the sleep information itself wasn't objectively measured, was it?
No, that's the second major limitation. It relied entirely on the participants filling out questionnaires about their sleep. It wasn't measured with things like wearable trackers or polysomnography in a sleep lab.
Which would give much more detailed, objective data.
Right. Self-reports can be influenced by memory, perception, all sorts of things. Maybe people who feel worse cognitively also perceive their sleep more negatively, for example.
Good point. And the third limitation.
The study population itself, it focused very specifically on people who had already had a mild stroke or a transient ischemic attack. So we can't just assume these findings, the link between longer time in bed or sleep duration and small vessel disease or cognitive scores, would apply to the general population, to people who haven't had such an event. It might be specific to this recovery phase.
Okay, so we have these really interesting, though, correlational findings and some significant limitations to keep in mind. Where does that leave us? It sounds like this study really opens the door for more questions, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It flags areas that urgently need more research. To really understand this, we definitely need longitudinal studies that follow people, both stroke survivors and maybe healthy controls over long periods, tracking their sleep objectively, mapping brain changes, monitoring cognitive function over time. That's how you can start to untangle the potential cause and effect relationships.
And we also need to know if these links hold true outside of the post-stroke context, right? Is longer time in bed or very long sleep associated with these brain issues in people who haven't had a stroke?
That's a critical public health question. Is this specific to stroke recovery, or is it a broader indicator of something related to vascular health or brain aging?
And maybe the most exciting question it raises
Is about intervention. Exactly. The sources point towards this. Could actively managing sleep patterns, or maybe the time people spend in bed after a mild stroke or transient ischemic attack, actually make a difference? Could it help prevent or lessen these negative brain changes or thinking problems?
So could things like sleep therapy or behavioral strategies become part of the standard recovery plan down the line?
That's the potential therapeutic implication, yes. If future research, perhaps randomized controlled trials, showed that improving sleep patterns positively impacts brain health outcomes after these events, that would be a really significant advance in care.
Wow. Okay, so summing up then, this study doesn't give us the final word. No immediate changes to clinical practice based on this alone.
No, definitely not yet.
But it powerfully highlights this really complex and potentially critical link between how we rest, how long we spend in bed, how long we sleep, and the ongoing health of our brain, particularly after something like a mild stroke or transient ischemic attack.
It reminds us that maybe even seemingly simple things, like just how long you stay in bed feeling tired, might be signaling deeper processes happening neurologically.
It's definitely something to keep a close eye on as more research in this area emerges. Feels like we're just scratching the surface here.
Agreed. It certainly emphasizes that recovery involves the whole 24-hour cycle, not just our waking hours. The patterns of rest matter, and we clearly have a lot more to learn about optimizing them for brain health.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.